Hello, insatiable listeners. We have now concluded our season 9 of Fiery Fertility. I have heard from so many of you how much you love the season. And if you haven't listened to season 9, I highly recommend you check it out, whether you're in the market for kids or not. It's really a look into our feminine power and how to access that through nutrition, our healthcare choices, and owning our story. We are now on hiatus between seasons, and I'm on maternity leave. I will be back on January 15th with a brand new season 10, which will be a crash course in truths with food. We will look at the root causes of why we can't lose weight and how addressing these root causes, which aren't about willpower or discipline, can make us feel back in control of food, get off the all or nothing roller coaster, get us to stop monitoring ourselves all the time, and trust ourselves when the dessert cart comes. All with a main course of self-compassion and self-acceptance that doesn't have to mean resignation if you aren't comfortable in your body. When you can accomplish this freedom and consistency, weight loss can be a side effect. I'm so excited to share this season with you. And Truths with Food, my signature boutique group program, will begin in March 2020 for another round. In the meantime, enjoy these popular Insatiable rebroadcast episodes to help you thrive during the holiday season and set you up really well for 2020. Can you believe it? It's 2020. All right. I look forward to reconnecting in the new year.
You know battling food in your body doesn't work. You want to love and accept yourself. And because you're insatiable, you want results too. And wouldn't you know, you bring the same intensity to your life, wanting to maximize your time, potential, and experiences you have here on this beautiful and wondrous planet Earth. Fair warning, it will be a roller coaster, but for those insatiable, that's your prime time to thrive. We're here to say yes to the hunger of wanting it all. I'm your co-host, Ali Shapiro, a health coach who helps people end the losing battle of dieting and find a truce with food.
And I'm Juliette Berg, nutritionist, fitness expert, and the co-owner of Unite Fitness Studio franchise.
Hey, insatiable listeners, Ali here. After we finished this episode, I realized that what a lot of my clients think is emotional eating is actual hunger. They don't recognize it as such because they don't actually know what healthy hunger feels like. There's all this misunderstanding around what real hunger is. And so I created a webinar to clear up the confusion. It's this coming Monday, February 22nd at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I'd love for you to join me. It's completely free and you can opt into the webinar at alishapiro.com/healthy hunger. Hope to see you on the webinar.
Welcome to episode 9, the 4 patterns of why we emotionally eat.
Juicy topic.
I know. I feel like this is the one I've been waiting for.
Yeah. But we could obviously make this topic probably 1,000 episodes. So we're going to talk about it today, but just know this is the first of many conversations about it. So
for sure.
Because Juliette and I have both struggled with it. So we'll talk a little bit about that today. Do you think you're ready?
Oh, I'm ready.
You're ready?
Yeah.
So we're super excited too, because we just, first of all, want to thank everyone, your excitement and how you're sharing this on social media. And we're just so excited. We were chatting, texting each other about, when we were both in the throes of our own emotional eating, we thought we were so alone and that no one understood. And a lot of people, it makes our heart happy that other people know that they're not alone in thinking about being interested in nutrition, thinking about it, and also, frustrated by it. So thank you so much for your feedback. And today's episode was actually inspired by someone who was listening and had read some stuff on my site and just, it really resonated, but felt like didn't even know the first place to start with emotional eating. And so, yeah, that's where a lot of people, I think, come from. So we're going to talk about that today. So we pay attention to what you ask. So keep sending in topic ideas and stuff like that. So, okay. So Juliette, where do you think we should start?
Well, I think that, we're talking about the 4 patterns of why we emotionally eat, and we'll definitely get to that because it's juicy stuff. But I think we can start a little bit just by giving a little background on, where emotional eating presented itself for you, Allie? And, is that what you called it when you were, in the throes of your eating issues? Would you have associated it with emotional eating, or did you call it something else? How did it feel for you?
Yeah, that's such a great question, because I think until we have language for it, and today we're going to talk about some of the ways that we've both heard our clients talk about it. I was looking back on, it's funny how you look back on things, and like I shared in some earlier episodes, I was looking back through my food journals as I was creating a free mini course for my list on blind spots to healthy weight loss, and realized that I was eating a lot more poorly than I thought I was. But what would happen in my journals is I would log everything. But then when I was off track, what I called off track, I just stopped journaling, and then I'd come back and be like, well, what happened? What happened? So I would never have said I was emotionally eating. I would have just felt like I couldn't trust myself if I was around sweets. I have a sweet tooth. So some of my clients love salty. I'm sweet. So I just felt anxiety, trepidation. Anytime I would go somewhere where there would be like tons of desserts, I would just be like, I want all the desserts. I want all the desserts. And I would think about them a lot. And sometimes I would have them. Sometimes I wouldn't. But I felt more controlled by food. I definitely emotionally ate, but it felt more like being out of control, or that I was being bad in a way. And so I probably would have called it bad eating. And I didn't think of myself as emotionally out of control, so I wouldn't have thought of myself as emotionally eating. I just thought, I can't trust myself around this. I love food and I eat badly.
Now, when did you start associating that feeling around food? At what age did you notice it?
Well, when so what's interesting now that I know what I know about weight loss, when I was 8 years old, I was exposed to pesticides in this really bizarre way. I was doing gymnastics in my neighbor's yard. Maybe I was 6 or 7. I forget the exact age, but I was rolling around in these lawn chemicals, and I woke up the next day with this horrible rash, and the doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. And for 2 weeks, I just had to live in an oatmeal bath and whatever. And I gained weight after that. And I now understand that, toxicity and inflammation cause weight gain. It's not just calories in, calories out. But I think looking back, what happened at that point then was I started to really like sweets. And I think I, in a way, felt out of control in my own body, because I didn't understand why I was gaining weight. The doctors didn't know what was wrong with me. And so I remember, and my dad was the one in my family who really was conscious of his weight. It wasn't my mom. He used to, my dad was heavy set growing up. Not heavy, not like super heavy, but he was chubby. He grew up in really poor conditions, and so lived in a very dangerous neighborhood on government food. So he was always growing up saying that he was running from the fat man, and I internalized that. So he was trying to help me, and he meant this in a dear way. So I want to provide that context. But I remember being like, he would give me $5 a week, and every time I would eat sweets, like if I ate sweets like Twizzlers or whatever I really liked, I'd lose $1. And I just remember never being able to last to get the $5. I know, it's so sad. And my dad wasn't like, hey, you have to lose weight. That wasn't the thing. It was like I wanted to do it. I've always been very like, this is what I'm going to do. So I think from that, and then I remember going to the pool, and even though I was gaining weight and on the swim team, I'd want to go to the snack shack and get all the Swedish fish, or get all the gummy bears, or, my parents used to joke too, they would put me up for a nap, and all of a sudden I would be hear the ice cream truck in the neighborhood, and I would just bound out of bed and find change and go to the ice cream. And they're like, I thought you were sleeping. So I just had internalized then that I was just loved sweets and was out of control. So it started at a very young age, and I went to Weight Watchers when I was 11 and all that stuff. So
you were probably reinforced by your parents in a way, because, oh, this is Allie. This is what you're into. You love sweets. So then you create a persona around that you tell yourself, and you believe yourself that you love sweets.
It's such a great point. And that's one of the things, in Truths with Food. Shameless plug. It's coming up in March. So check out my site if you're interested in it. It's a 3-month coaching program where I really help clients see that they don't love sweets, that there's reasons that they're having a moment where they like sweets. They aren't someone that can't live without them or whatever, that identity piece. So yeah, no, it definitely reinforces that. How about you though? I mean, when did you first have your emotional eating episode? Or would you have called yourself that? Or when you became super conscious of feeling powerless around food, I guess?
Yeah, there's a lot of different pieces to this, but I can date it back to being in elementary school and being in the basement of our home, where we made a finished basement, and it was often where I would go and isolate myself and watch television after school, and I would just eat. I would just sit in the basement and eat. And I remember feeling like I could never get enough. I never had that feeling of being full or satisfied. And I felt sort of powerless over food. I remember taking trips upstairs to the kitchen, because the kitchen was right up the stairs, and I can remember this distinct memory of fruit roll-ups. Like we had a box of fruit roll-ups, and I would get one roll of fruit roll-ups and go downstairs and eat it. And then I would be like, I have to go get another one. And then I would get another one. And I went up and down the stairs until I finished the entire box of fruit roll-ups. And that kind of pattern continued for me with other foods too, like cookies or whatever it was. I had to finish the entire box of it before I felt satisfied. It was like an obsessive feeling around food and just feeling powerless over it. And, my dad was, I would say, an emotional eater. He was an overeater. He actually passed away from a massive heart attack when I was 16. He was really morbidly obese, and he had issues with food, from as far back as I can remember. He just kept gaining weight and gaining weight and gaining weight. And really, he maybe went on a diet once in my life and, didn't really lose that much when he was even on it. But, he always taught my brother and I that food was this celebratory thing. Food was pleasure, and we were always encouraged to have second helpings of things, third helpings. There was really no boundaries when it came to food, and that was because there really was no boundaries for him. Mm-hmm. And it was just all about like, we're going to celebrate tonight. We're going to go out to this restaurant and you guys can order whatever you want. And so I just learned from a really young age that food was this like really amazing, pleasurable, celebratory thing. And so I definitely had a lot of mixed emotions around food and weight gain, and seeing my dad and how big he was and not wanting to gain weight as I became a teenager. And, we're going to do an episode a little bit later on trauma and weight gain and trauma and emotional eating. We're not going to get too much into that today, but I did have a lot of trauma in my life, a lot of different traumatic experiences between my father's death, my mother's mental illness, my brother's mental illness. And I found food as a way to control a lot of that. So I started dieting at a young age, and it was very much in conjunction with almost like an obsessive compulsive disorder for me, where I would just use food in this way of, if I can control how much I'm eating or what I'm eating, then everything's going to be okay in my life. And so that started in my teens. And, the body image problems that I was having, just being a teenager, was also escalating all of that obsession I had around food and what I was eating. So they kind of just fed off each other. And it was this like really negative cycle that I was in that really just kept going until my early 20s. And it morphed in many different ways. I didn't find relief in it until I started dealing with the traumas in my life and healing those past experiences. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. But emotional eating for me was tied a lot around trauma. So.
Well, what's interesting to me is that at 5 years old, and I think this is a reflection of our culture, right? A lot of us think we're alone, and we're like, why am I using food to cope? And it's like, well, that's the tools that our culture offers. They offer alcohol, food, shopping, and sex, right? And sports. These are the tools. So I think what's interesting is, why were you isolating yourself?
Yeah, well, that goes back to a lot to the trauma in my life. I mean, before there was any major trauma, like, death and sickness, there was, well, I mean, the sickness part with my mom being mentally ill, from really the time she always had mental illness, even from the time that I was born. And my dad was kind of an absentee father. I forgive my parents, and they did the best that they could. But, I really was neglected as a child and wasn't really given the proper attention or love and support that I needed at such an impressionable age. So there was a lot of chaos in with my parents. They did not get along. They ended up divorcing when I was 12, but it took them forever to get the divorce. So, I remember them fighting my whole childhood. So honestly, I think isolating myself was to get away from the chaos that was happening in my household. So I would just say, I need to be alone. I need to be away from the yelling. I'm going to go in the basement. I'm going to, just stuff myself with sugar, which is releases a lot of feel good chemicals. It makes you feel like you're being rewarded. And, it's relaxed. It's a relaxant. Chewing is a relaxant too. For those of you out there, chewing, releases the same, you're relaxing when you're chewing. So I just got myself into this habit of like, this is what I know. This is how I relax. I watch TV by myself and I eat.
Well, and when you think about a 5-year-old, that's actually pretty brilliant. Like, you understood that whatever was happening upstairs was not healthy, right? Like, you didn't need any psychological, you just intuitively knew. And so you did the best you could with the resources available to you.
Yeah. And I mean, that's for a lot of people. It doesn't matter how old you are. Food issues are really a side effect of stressors that are happening in your life. So, if you can start to look at it like that, that you're doing, you might feel powerless over food and your patterns with food, but you're really doing it for a good reason. I know that sounds funny, but you're doing it to protect yourself or to cope. And as Allie likes to call it, it's like the good girl drug, food instead of, it's not like we're doing lines of Coke and drinking
stealing from people.
Yeah. Yeah. Your outlet is food, it could be worse, but I know a lot of you do feel like, you are at a rock bottom with this stuff. So we want to talk to you about, how we can kind of become more self-aware around what your patterns are with emotionally eating.
Yeah. And I'm so glad that this was a beautiful bridge that you just set up. So thank you. But I think we have to have compassion for if we are emotional eaters or struggling with food, because I know clients often come to me exasperated. Like, why can't I fix this? And like, they're defensive and they're angry at themselves. And it's really, think of yourself, this is the best skill set you have right now. You can change it, and if it's now's the time, woohoo, like, we will cheer you on. If it's not, that's cool too. But you're not, it's a level of understanding. Einstein said we can't solve a problem at the same level of consciousness it was created. And I think a lot of the conventional dieting industry, and when you watch these weight loss shows, right, they're like, you don't want it bad enough. And like, they're still at the level that, hey, this is just about you not wanting it bad enough, or this is about you being weak, or about you being lazy, or whatever you even tell yourself, right? You don't even need to go on a reality weight loss show to feel like shit.
And honestly, I mean, I wanted it bad enough,
Well,
like,
we all,
y'all want it bad enough. And, for me, it was all I ever thought about,
Me
like,
too.
just my body and wanting to change my diet and wanting to look and feel better. So it's like, I don't know how much more I had to want it for it to work, but that wasn't the answer.
Right. And so it's and what I always tell my clients, like, if this was a logic problem based on willpower or based on drive, like, you would have figured this out already. But often that drive is actually the problem, because we need to have compassion for this rather than just try to plow through it. So I think thinking of it as, wow, so let's talk a little bit about how we're defining emotional eating. So you can understand, like, okay, for right now, that's the skill set that I have to deal with whatever I'm eating from, right? It's food. It's not that I'm bad, that I'm weak, that I need to fix something. This is just how I know how to cope right now. So, we talked about 4 different areas. And I think that the first one and what you talked about is, celebratory, or a reward, right? Like, what I often hear my clients say is, well, I just tell myself I deserve this, or I'm going to have a cheat day, right? Implying that you're rewarding yourself from deprivation.
Yeah.
Is often the language I hear with my clients when it comes to reward.
And when we say deprivation, it could mean a bunch of things, right? It could be deprivation from, you're eating a certain way, Monday through Friday. And then you go, you're like, okay, I can finally eat whatever I want. It's Friday night. All bets are off. But deprivation can also mean, that you are starving yourself of other kinds of important pleasures in your life, like socializing, like relaxing, doing things that are not revolving around your job. If you have a really off work-life balance, if it's really, if it's really out of balance, then that can also be deprivation.
For sure. For sure. I remember a big turning point in my weight loss and food was I had this really prestigious job and I was traveling to Europe and it was exciting, but I was just, it wasn't fulfilling me. And I made this, I was living in Philly at the time and commuting to the suburbs. And I was like, this drive, not only does it take 2 hours of my time, but it isolates me in the burbs. I was living in the city. And when I was like, I just want to make my career goal that I can walk to work. And people told me I was committing career suicide, and I was like, I'm 24. I need to figure myself out. This is something intuitively I just listened to, but just eliminating my commute, my nighttime eating went down significantly because that's another big way that people use food as a reward, like a nighttime treat. I'm treating myself. That nighttime ritual of eating is often about reward. So
because you're depriving yourself throughout your day of just feeling good or
meaning.
And I mean, when I'm saying you're depriving yourself, a lot of times it's not on purpose, right? You have a job, you have stress that's happening throughout the day, but it's this pattern we get into, which is like, oh, I can't take a deep breath until I get home.
Yes, exactly.
I can't relax. I can't I can't slow down until I'm home.
Exactly. Well, beautifully put. So that's one category. That's one pattern of emotional eating. The other pattern that I see, and this was my pattern, was the all or nothing pattern. I'm either on or off. So when I'm, and again, I wouldn't have called it emotional eating. I would have just said it was bad eating, but it was I'm going to eat all the blueberry muffins in the office. I'm going to, and sneak it because I can't do it publicly. No one can really see me. Or I'm going to an event and I'm so excited because I know they're going to have dessert there and I'm going to eat the desserts, right? So that all or nothing is when you're off, you're just really off. And everything is or people often do this on vacation, right? I mean, that's all or nothing. It's part reward too, but I'm just not going to care this week. I can't, so that's another way that, I think people do all or nothing, or if they're traveling, that's one of those categories. The other thing that I see is the energy pattern. So when, to your point, if people aren't taking a breath, they're often really tired. And I noticed this for myself about a year ago. I was having dark chocolate every afternoon, and I don't think dark chocolate is unhealthy, but I was like, why do I want that? And it was really, I needed a nap. I needed a 10 to 15 minute nap, but I felt so guilty. I was telling Juliet before we started this podcast, in my head, I'm like, oh my God, you're so privileged. You should not be taking a nap. Please, it made me feel really guilty to take a nap, even though I needed one. And, I finally sometimes let myself do that. But, a lot of people use, and I didn't realize, it took me, even as aware as I am from having so many food issues, it really took me a month to figure out, why am I going to that? And I was like, oh my God, it's because I'm tired. And a lot of people over caffeinate to mask this, or they might, if their blood sugar isn't balanced in the morning, they crave, something sweet. And it feels emotional because when your blood sugar drops, you also feel sad, sad, you can feel a lot of things. Hangry, yeah. But that's often what that mid-morning snack is about too, is it's an energy issue. And I find also a lot of my clients will find that transition from work to home, and they think it's that they need the ritual of kind of, bookending the day of work. But oftentimes they're exhausted and they just don't even realize it because it's become so normalized.
Yeah. And, I had a client, it's just making me think of this, and we were really trying to work on nighttime eating for her. And what was happening is she was bringing a lot of work home. And she was, already had worked all day in the office and then was trying to do this work at home, but was procrastinating and using food to distract herself and just kept eating. And then I said to her, so do you eventually get your work done? And she said, no, I never do. It was a pattern that she was in, which was, she was trying to do this, trying to get the work done, but it never was happening. So ultimately we were like, well, don't try to get the work done. Don't do it. You're not doing it anyways. So just accept that you're not going to do work when you go home, and actually be home and allow yourself to be home and relax. And, and her nighttime eating it disappeared. She didn't need it anymore.
It's amazing. You bring up a good point. Another way that this emotional eating shows up is, people eat between switching tasks. So if you're going, and then all of a sudden you're switching a task, it's like, unconsciously, you're like, this is my only chance to breathe, right? So people who are really energy driven or energy deprived often have this pattern of eating in between tasks as a procrastination, as a chance to catch their breath, to power through. But that's another sign that you're, not eating because you're hungry or whatnot, but what people would think of as emotional eating. That's a really
that was something that Allie worked on with me when she and I first met. I had about 7 different teaching jobs for group fitness. And I was running around the city like a maniac, going from one teaching gig to another, spending all this energy, actually working out, whether it was teaching spin or yoga or working out one-on-one with people. So not only, I'm burning a lot of calories. So, I did need the extra food, but the problem was I was eating my food super fast in between appointments. I would be eating my food standing up. Sometimes I'd be eating my food while walking to the next appointment. And then I would always get home at the end of the day, and I would need to bookend my day like you were talking about. And I would need to I never had a chance to enjoy my food during the day because I didn't give myself the opportunity to actually taste the food. I was just shoveling it in my mouth. So when I would get home, I would just milk every second I was home to enjoy food because I didn't have that during the day. So just a simple shift I made was I made sure that I took a lunch break. And to this day, I'm like obsessive about my lunch break. I don't schedule appointments during certain times so that I can have the time to sit down, eat, and enjoy my lunch and enjoy every major meal, and then if I can do that, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, I don't feel that same need to overeat at the end of the day.
Well, and that's such a good point because rather than trying to squeeze it in, right, then you end up leaking energy in a way, right? And you're like, no, I'm going to take this all in. And then it just ends up, then you don't think about it as much. You get the pleasure from it, to your point of what you were saying earlier. Food is pleasurable. It should be. That's another thing. Like, my clients are like, I love food. I don't want to love food. I'm like, no, I want you to love food, just not in a codependent way.
It's so good. It's so good. It's so healing. It is so pleasurable on so many levels, on an intracellular level to, it's so good. I was thinking now even, when I'm home and I'm having dinner and, Mackie wants to talk to me. I really, really just want to be with my food and enjoy it and slow down and eat it. And I can't do 2 things at once. I don't want to be trying to, talk about my day or, I'm not on the computer. I'm not on, I don't take phone calls while I'm eating. I'm like, no, I'm just going to eat my food. This is very pleasurable.
Well, and I've noticed a pattern when people like genuinely don't care about food. I think there's also like some underlying depression.
I don't trust people. No.
Yeah. Well, no, but I talked about, I think it was on episode 5. Yeah. The New Year's resolutions. I shared a little bit. I listened to it today. I was like, oh wow, I shared a lot. But that year that I was working with Bob and just depressed, I did not care about food. And I just really think that was a metaphor for just not being in life at that moment. Which brings up the 4th pattern, actually. And I think I see this with a lot of clients. I see this all the time, but it's the social aspect when we feel really isolated. Well, first of all, it comes out in celebratory ways, right? Thanksgiving, Super Bowl's coming up. Well, by the time people listen to this, it'll be February, Valentine's Day, any holiday, food, because again, it's a big tool that America uses. Food is so central to social situations. So people eat socially to celebrate, but they also eat socially when they don't want to look like they're on a diet. They also, eat socially when they don't tell the server about food allergies they have because they don't really know the people they're out with. And so they want to ignore that. So that I think is anything that is disconnecting you from what you really need or isolating you in a social situation, I think is also emotional eating because it's not in alignment with what you need personally. Any other things you think of is how social emotional eating comes up? It's the fourth pattern.
No, but just that I can remember utilizing certain friends in my circle that I knew I could get away with binge eating and they wouldn't judge me because they also did the same thing or they also had food issues. And I had to work on almost like reevaluating certain friendships that I had and what our friendships were based on. I had certain friends, that I know that this friend I can have her come over and we can order, a ton of Indian food and just binge eat on. Then we could go get ice cream and there will be no judgment on either part.
I had a friend in college who I think our whole relationship was our food obsessions and diet.
Yeah. And that's not a real friendship. I mean,
But at the time you're like, someone gets me. They understand. Because a lot of my friends didn't understand. I mean, I have a couple of friends that I can think of. They're like the only people I know who don't have food issues. And I seem to have found them.
That's awesome.
Well, no, but like I hid that from them. I mean, they knew I was always trying a diet or like, oh, what can't you eat? Like kind of joking around, but they never knew, I think, how tortured and held back I felt by all of those years. So I think we wanted to give you guys some ways of recognizing that, hey, what I kind of have normalized or whatever may not, that's when I'm eating out of alignment with my goals and what I want. That's some of the ways that it shows up. And often, again, just what we talked about, take a look at yourself. And do you see yourself with any of that? Or do you think about like, oh, I am eating as I switch tasks? Wow, that is the pattern.
And I just thought of one other thing, Allie, that I think is super, super important. The whole being rebellious with food thing.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is, so when I was talking to you about, having certain friends that I would like be able to just kind of like go off the rails with, a lot of that was like, I'm going to be rebellious, like I'm, and a little bit of with the all or nothing mentality, but it's like, if you're so on it, you're so good in your life, you're getting all your tasks done, your boss loves you, you try so hard, you have that, pleasing mentality. You're always trying to please yourself and others, that it's like, well, you better go off the rails with food because, you got to live a little somewhere. And that, so that rebellious thing is also an emotional trigger with food.
For sure. And I think it brings up the point that it's not always, emotional eating isn't always about the food itself. And I mean, you alluded to the trauma and we'll have a podcast about that because that was also a big piece of my own healing with food. But the all or nothing or the I'm so good everywhere else, that our ideas of good, and this is what I call the good girl gridlock. That's what we really diagnose each person's gridlock. It often, how we're trying to be good, we may know on like an intellectual level, or we think we're just trying to be accomplished and achieved. But the really nuanced ways that affects us and drains us is often a blind spot because you've normalized it for so long, right? And it's things that you don't even question. And I think that's how you really, and we'll have to do some later podcasts on this, but really get underneath the emotional eating because, once you've started to emotionally eat, the best thing you can do is look back and think about what happened, because in the beginning, you're going to just have to catch it after the fact, I think, as you start to understand, all right, what is my trigger? Is it because I'm tired? Is it because I'm bonding with friends, right? I mean, that's a big way that women bond is through dieting. Is it because I'm in a nothing streak? And why do I feel like I have to be so perfect the other days, But yeah, I kind of went off on a tangent, but I think I just agree with your point. And I think that's one of the first things that we want to talk about, in this episode is like bringing awareness to quote unquote bad eating, emotional eating. I deserve this, however it's showing up for you. And
there's stages to this. Think of it like, like the whole peeling back the layers of an onion. There are definitely stages to uncovering emotional eating and why we emotionally eat. So, as we're kind of foreshadowing like trauma and all this stuff, and you're like, oh no, I want that now. Let's talk about that now. We don't
or some of my clients are like, I've never had trauma. Like,
or you've never had trauma. Yeah. But, there are stages to kind of figuring this stuff out. But this first episode on emotional eating, trust that we're going to talk about kind of what are really the first things you have to do to start to stop or decrease this pattern.
Yeah. And awareness is such a big piece of that. So let's talk a little bit about that awareness. I think that a lot of times, especially if, like some people wrote in, I don't even know the first place to start. And I think, again, thinking back to times when you did after the fact, think back to, or even if it happens this week, thinking, wow, what happened leading up to that? What happened leading up to that is a really interesting question. Because by the time you're at the bag itself, it's not really about loving chips. It feels like it's about loving chips, but it might have been an email that you got that you thought, oh my God, now I'm going to have to, stay late, or an email that was like, oh my God, there's a conflict here and I'm really uncomfortable with conflict.
Yeah, well, for me, and I would say there's no end all cure for being an emotional eater. The thing that you're going to end up doing is catching yourself ahead of time and understanding your patterns and what your triggers are so that you're not feeling overpowered by these patterns and feeling out of control with food. For me, it's always creating space and time. When I don't leave myself enough time, it always will make me crave food, or I will eat too fast, and then I'll end up overeating. So I just know myself that I have to build in time. For example, I had dinner with somebody, and I had a really, really, really long day, and I had to rush home and get ready for the dinner. And honestly, at that point, all I wanted to do was just have more time at home. And I should have built that in, because when I got to the dinner, my head was just kind of not in the right space, and I ate really quickly. And and that to me was a way of eating emotionally for me, for my standards. So I know myself that I usually build in, okay, go home for an hour, kind of it's almost like a way to meditate for me, is just to be able to not be around people for a little while, because I'm around people all day, and not, and to have an hour alone. And maybe this goes back to my childhood and having that alone time, but I just value it. Like, I value time by myself. And if I can get that time, then I could have gone to that dinner and I could have felt more centered and engaged with the person, and not, wanting to not be there.
Yeah. No, well, and what you're describing, I mean, first of all, let's back up. I think it's important though, because you said there's not a cure all. I think you meant like there's not a formula, but
yeah,
I know both of us are at a place, and part of why I wanted to do this podcast with you is we've both done the work to be on the other side of it. So does that mean we always eat quote unquote perfectly? No, but there's no guilt around.
Exactly. Yeah. I didn't go home after that and be like, oh my God, why did you eat so quick fast? Why did you, take rice off of her plate? It wasn't like, it was, there was no guilt at all. It was just, you just notice it with completely neutral feelings and compassion, and you move on from it right away. There's no, so.
Yeah. Well, and I think it comes back to, and again, you're the one who said this. I mean, I said it, but you're the one who used the word before we got on the podcast, is I think it becomes a problem when you feel powerless over what you just did, because that sets up the guilt and the vicious cycle of you eat, then what you don't want to, and then you don't trust yourself, and then you feel out of control, so you eat more, and it just perpetuates this cycle. And that's when things get dangerous. I mean, everyone is, I say I don't emotionally eat anymore, but do I still, over Christmas, I ate more than I normally did this year, but did I care? No. Did I try to cut back the next day? No. I just, let my body balance itself out. So the emotional part of eating is when the guilt is tied to that, or the powerlessness and feeling out of control. And it makes you doubt yourself and frustrate yourself. That's when I think it's the issue. It becomes an issue that if you want to work on, by all means.
Yeah. I mean, it's this common scenario I can think of, this image. And I remember when I was working through my food issues, I had wrote down on a piece of paper, I'll know that I'm better, or healed from this affliction when I can have a plate of cookies in front of me and I don't have to feel like I can't stop eating them and I have to eat them all. They all have to be gone. Because as we talked about, that was a really emotional thing for me with food, was like eating it until the plate was completely clean, and eating the box of fruit roll-ups until the box was empty. So for me, it was knowing that I could have a plate of cookies in front of me and I could have a cookie, or maybe I had two, or maybe I ate the whole plate, but I didn't care. That I didn't feel bad about it anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it's another thing too that we wanted to, this isn't a linear process. And so it's not like one day you don't feel guilty and the next day you do. I think what happens is you chip away at the guilt and the draw of food over time. And the more that you refine the skills that you need to do that and to identify what's really underneath the food, then over time, that cycle really, it goes from like powerlessness to really powerful. And I think it's such an important process to go through. I mean, that's why I created Truths with Food. That's what I teach, is the skill sets, how to do that. Is because unfortunately in our culture, food is taking on even greater importance. I mean, now there's all this like moral baggage attached to it, which in a way is good. I mean, we're learning where our food's coming from and all this stuff. But I mean, I always use the example of like growing up, like there was never like the amount of chocolate that I can buy right now for Valentine's Day is like out of control. The amount of food you can buy for St. Patrick's Day. I never even remember celebrating St. Patrick's Day beyond like a leprechaun hat, or something. Easter. It's like now Easter brunch. It's like everything, yeah. Food and like food blogs. I mean, food has exploded. And so if you can't, it's everywhere now. And so trying to, just manage it with willpower alone and not getting underneath it or the understanding the emotions, it's going to be a really exhausting life. So that's kind of a tangent, but
yeah. And I was just thinking about, some of the tactics that I had tried to help me, with my emotional eating problems, different books I had read and articles, and, a lot of them were just more stress, and it's actually exacerbating the problem. And it was like, try harder, or, one of them was, that I remember thinking about, and it was like, I don't think there's any way I could do this. Like, this was sort of at the tail end of it, was only eat when you're hungry. And
I hate that one. I'm like, if I could do that, I wouldn't be reading your book. No.
Yeah, only eat when you're hungry, and all of your problems will disappear. Your emotional eating problems,
or
just
like
listen to your body.
Yeah. Oh, that's my favorite. I mean, I say listen to your body, but at least you have to teach people how to do that. Because I was like, my body wants Doritos, and cookies. I was more cookies type of person. But yeah, or like sit down and meditate on your food. I'm like, if the reason that I'm reading this book is because I'm standing in my fridge eating all the cookies because I can't sit down.
Yeah. Yeah. But like all of that is just more doing and more stressing and more thinking. And it's not really feeling, which is what we're going to talk about as far as becoming aware. It's going to be a lot more about feeling than thinking.
Completely. And, it made me think of when you were saying like, I'll know I'll be done with this affliction, or when you were using those words, it just reminded me of how important framing is, because it creates a feeling. And when we look at this emotional eating or feeling out of control, that we're actually, we're powerless or we're out of control, thinking about it that way rather than, whoa, this is a symptom. Like this, I'm not out of control. This is a warning sign. When we reframe that, all of a sudden, you can take one of the other tools we wanted to share today is like evaluating versus judging and being curious, like, whoa, what is this, warning shot? I always think of, the revolutionary, the shot that was heard around the world. Like, what is this draw towards cookies about? Like, what is this warning me about? And bringing that curiosity and the awareness, that is going to bring you to that other level of consciousness that you can then understand this problem at, because you cannot understand it at a thinking level.
Yeah. And just talking about feeling, actually, when you're at the Mexican restaurant and the chips come out and
you're starving.
Yeah, you're starving. And, I would notice my heart rate would elevate. my breathing would actually get a little like rapid. It was really like a almost like a drug addict response to food. And it's rather than judging that, just being like, this is really interesting. Like, check out what's happening right now in my body. Like, my heart rate is up. I'm breathing rapidly. I'm like panting a little here. This is really interesting over some tortilla chips. What is this about? You know?
Well, and by doing that, right? If you were like, what the fuck is happening? Like, what, like that actually drains you more.
Yeah. Or saying, don't do it. Don't do it. You don't need it. Don't even have
How
lunch.
are you going to feel in the morning?
Yeah.
You have to weigh in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. But that actually wears you down. That's why what I found ironic about, not ironic, but do you remember that book Willpower that came out several years ago? And like the conclusion,
I can like see it in my head, like the
yeah. And the conclusion was like, oh, willpower, it takes glucose, which is, all of our food in our body breaks down to glucose. So it takes food to have willpower, but then you have to eat to like have the willpower not to eat. And people were like, this is why it's so hard. And I'm like, no, what we need to work on is, why do people think they need willpower around food? And that's what emotional eating is about, and getting to the root of that. And so yeah, it's willpower and trying to should yourself, or shoulding all over yourself or beating yourself up. It feels constructive, but again, if you measure how much that's helped, you'll probably find it hasn't. Well, maybe you think it's helped in some ways, but the problem is still there. So
let me ask you this, Allie, for our listeners out there. What is a tangible tool that you can give somebody for that scenario of they have a hard time, controlling themselves around, the tortilla chips at a restaurant?
Yeah.
They feel like they can't stop eating them.
Yeah. Well, the first question that I often like to ask people is, what do you love about that? What do you love about just eating all the chips? What do you love about just going into the kitchen and eating the muffin? What do you love about just like this, face diving? And not that people are face diving, but what do you love about it? Right? Flip this framing. If this is a really brilliant symbol, which I believe the psyche, and I know this to be true, if we take it this way, but emotional eating is a really great opportunity to have some sort of healing. Again, it doesn't have to be from trauma, but it gives us a way to step into our power, right? Because all of our wounds, Juliet and I were talking about this before. I mean, being in American culture is traumatic, especially if you're in a female body. It doesn't matter what your size, whatever. It's just traumatic. And research shows you don't have to go through, quote unquote, big T trauma to feel traumatized. So this emotional eating is, wow, it's a chance to heal. And so I would first ask, what do you love about this? Like, let's not think it's something bad. Let's think it's something really brilliant, and it's the best way that you know how to handle a situation right now.
So do you mind if we use me as an example from my past to kind of walk?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yes. Okay.
Oh my God, I love this stuff.
So I would say that what I loved about it, we could say, we could pretend like I still do, is I probably would have said it tastes good. It feels good. It tastes good.
And what do you love about it tasting so good?
I think that there is a sense of like relief. Like it was relieving something, some need.
Mm-hmm. So relief.
Yeah. Pleasure and relief.
Yeah. And why didn't you want that to end?
Because who wants pleasure and relief to end? Those are like two major things. Sounds like sex.
So what made you think, I mean, this is kind of hard because oftentimes when you're in the moment, you get a different answer than reflecting back on it. So like,
yeah, for sure. I feel like I wouldn't have had I knew I didn't have the awareness. It would have just been like, it tastes good. And I don't want to stop it. I don't want to stop because it tastes so good, Yeah.
So what my next question was going to be, so what you said was it was relief and pleasure. And what makes you think that pain or that pleasure and relief starts and ends with food?
What makes me think that?
Yeah.
I probably it was just something that I always associated food with that. All throughout my life,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Always like growing up, like I was telling you about my father and how we were just brought up to feel like food was going to be relieving and pleasurable. That's just what we were taught.
Mm-hmm. In your experience, was it in the moment and afterwards?
I think when I was a kid, it was both in the moment and afterwards, because that was before I had any sort of image concerns. But I think that later it was just, during. Afterwards, it was not. Afterwards, it was actually painful because it's, guilt ridden.
So telling yourself that it's pleasurable and relief isn't completely true.
I guess not then. Yeah. Relief in the moment. Well, you're feeling it in the moment. You think it's relief, but really it's actually creating pain.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is, it's hard in retrospect because, but in Truths with Food, what we get to is what about that moment makes you feel powerless? Because again, and I talked about this on an earlier episode, and I think your clients, given how they train, are probably very similar to my clients, that they like a challenge. Mm-hmm. Like, these are not people who are sitting there being like, I'm just going to tiptoe quietly in life, right? Yeah. But when we feel defenseless in the face of feeling powerless is when we feel powerless. But if we have skills and tools, all of a sudden that same challenge or that same stressor becomes a challenge instead of feels powerless. Mm-hmm. And so really understanding and really what we talk about in Truths with Food are the beliefs underneath the emotion, right? Because emotions are very powerful, but they're often created by our own beliefs in the world that we're living in. So you have to x-ray that often at a time when you're not so emotional or in it, because you can't.
Yeah. And I think what we were talking about with when I was a kid, it's like, okay, this is relieving and pleasurable, but it's like, that was just the story that I came up with as a child, but that's not really what it was about, and in retrospect, you can see that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, if we were coaching in real time, we would have zeroed in on like a specific point. Like a client example that came up this week is a client of mine was, she went away for a weekend, like a girls' weekend, and she knew some of the people there, some of the people she didn't. And there were like all these, sweet, like the person brought like all these homemade desserts and all that kind of stuff. And she was like, I ate a lot less than I would have in the past. However, I still felt like it was hard because they were just staring, for like hours. We were just sitting in front of them. Mm-hmm. And I helped her see that, she had a similar experience early in the week, where there was food and sweets, and she had a little bit then and then like didn't think about it anymore. And I helped her see that the difference there was when she was away that weekend was there was more uncertainty. There was like, I don't know all these people. I don't know all these activities we're doing. Like there was a lot of like, I don't know what I'm doing. I feel a little bit awkward. And all of that awkwardness is what gets projected onto the food, which why it feels like it's a relief and why it feels like it feels pleasurable, or I would say a relief probably that's probably what you would have said. Maybe not pleasurable, but it felt like a relief to project all of that onto the food, but that's not really, it was about our own, her own uncomfortability. So,
yeah. And it really, maybe for that split second while you're eating the food, it takes your mind off of the uncomfortability, but it comes right back. It's not like it's actually, it's not a magic trick where you have food and then, all of a sudden you're like super confident in the group and, that's not how it works at all.
Right. And a lot of this stuff we've normalized for so long. Like, well, I always feel like I've always loved, food's always been pleasure and relief. Right. And so it's like kind of how we kick this call off. Like that you have, Carlos is a writer, so I can't help but think of when he talks about narrative, like in all movies or books, there's the inciting incident, right? It's the thing that you're like, like, that kicks off the story, the tension. And I think all of us who, and not all of my clients have struggled with food forever. Some of them, it's after their first baby, or it's once they were in college or, high school. But all of us have that first incident where like food becomes the salve. It becomes the relief. And then we don't, and again, it's probably the most brilliant tool we had at the time. And like, yay for us for finding something that would do the trick. But now we have to grow up those parts of ourselves. And really that's where our power is. And that's how you don't feel powerless about food. But then what's also interesting is a lot of my clients, they say, oh, if I could just taking care of this food thing, then everything would fall into place. And what they don't realize is that food thing and the skills that they're going to develop is going to help the things they want to fall into place be even more powerful. Because again, we've normalized a certain level of confidence, but we can have even more confidence when we restore the sides of ourselves that feel powerless around food. It's super exciting. I mean, yeah, I mean, wouldn't you say, as someone who you've done the work, I mean, don't you feel like, I feel a level of confidence that I never knew I needed or that when I thought I was confident before, I realized like, yeah, you were. I wasn't like insecure, but like I have a sense of empowerment that I didn't even know I was missing.
Yeah. And for me, a little different because I always was somebody who lacked confidence and feeling empowered. For me, having food as a side effect was the way that I was able to it was like the key to unlocking pretty much everything I had gone through in my childhood and all that trauma. And thank God it showed itself through food. And, there's a lot of other ways it could have presented itself. So I'm really grateful for that. There are a lot of people in my position who became drug addicts or alcoholics or, like we were talking about the good girl drug. But for me, it was using food, and it was really the doorway to like me having confidence now going through all those issues. So
that's what I'm
incredible.
Saying. Yeah, it was for me. I mean, me too. Super transformative. I mean, I wish I would have learned it faster. Not gonna lie.
I know, right? Well, for all the listeners out there, hopefully this is really helpful as it was for us.
Yeah. So remember the awareness piece first. And again, in the beginning, you may have to look at it after the fact. But another thing I was going to say too, Juliet, think about what you love about it, but I loved your recommendation of space. Space is basically give yourself time to think about this. That could be look at like journaling. It could be thinking about it, whatever way that you can reflect the best. It's amazing. Your own answers will come and you got to trust it. But they will come. And I think that's such a powerful tool in this awareness piece. And then the being evaluative, evaluate versus judge. Get curious about it. What do I love about this? Why does it make so much sense? Like, don't ask why, because why you won't know, but like, what do I love about this? What about this makes a lot of sense? And the answer may not come the first time. It probably won't. But if you keep asking yourself that and journaling about it, I think you'll start to get some beginning inklings.
Yeah, and accepting where you are right now and giving yourself permission to have food issues right now.
Yeah.
I think that was huge for me. It was a really big turning point for me when I just accepted that I am going to eat this entire jar of peanut butter right now. I'm just going to accept it. And it's funny when you accept it, when you give yourself permission in a sense, and you're not like, don't eat it, or only have a little bit, or you start to, have boundaries around it. When you just kind of just let it happen, it was neutralizing in a way. It was, I got to the point where I'm like, I'm good. Okay.
That's paradox. I mean, you're speaking my language. That's the crux of change is what we resist persists and what we embrace dissolves. So, but I gave
this advice to someone recently, a family member of mine, actually, who, funny enough, she has it with peanut butter. And I said,
is it genetic?
I bet you most people listening would raise their hand and say, me too. I mean, I have so many female clients with the peanut butter thing, Yeah.
Make sure you get organic because it's a very heavily sprayed crop.
Yes, organic. But I said to her, well, why don't you just buy 5 jars of peanut butter and just let yourself eat peanut butter? Because, it was she's like, I can't have it around me at all. I'm like, well, just buy a bunch of it. She's like, oh, just let myself eat peanut butter until I'm sick of eating peanut butter. I'm like, well, I mean, you might not have to get sick of it, but it neutralizes it for sure, I think. And, like what you're saying, what you resist persists. And the goal is to not have food issues. Like I was saying, when I wrote down in my journal is I don't want to feel powerless over food. I want to be able to have a jar of peanut butter in my fridge and not have it be on the back of my mind the entire day.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would just add, I mean, I agree. You totally have to neutralize and normalize. And I would also say though, that it's helpful to get help or support when you're doing that, because there are, and I think this is probably where I differ from some of the intuitive eating. I'll have to read more about intuitive eating. I mean, I eat intuitively, but I don't know the exact principles. But one of the big reasons I created Truce with Food was so that people didn't spend years normalizing, like, you know, eating whatever they wanted, because then there is a physiological component that, you know, you then kind of start to like, well, what is working for me? What isn't? You know, your blood sugar's out of whack. So it's delicate, but you do have to do that. And it's just how you do it. That I think, and I know you would say the same thing. I mean, you coach people and all that stuff. So.
Oh no, I just tell people that they can buy, you know, boxes of Oreos and they just eat as much as they want. No, for sure. I mean,
but exercise according to your body type. No.
Oh yeah. I mean, that I should probably rephrase it. That piece of it doesn't come till later with people. I don't address something like that until much later into coaching. It always starts with balancing blood sugar and making healthy food changes first. And then, you know, we kind of start to see if those patterns are coming into play and what we would need to do and how to address those later on.
Yeah, because, you know, a lot of that stuff, we should do like a podcast on like our different ideas on the different diets, because I think a lot of diets start with like the emotional piece, but it's so much easier to deal with the emotional piece if a lot of cravings and like thinking about food clears up when you get someone's blood sugar balanced and their gut online. Like that's such it makes it easier, I think.
Yeah. So, oh yeah, definitely.
And I'm just going to shamelessly plug Truce with Food once again, because it is coming up in March and we do all of that in the 3-month program. And so check it out at alishapiro.com/truce with food. And depending on when this releases, I'll probably be doing some classes or a webinar around the program. So definitely check it out and get it on my list. And the link will be in the show notes, but I don't even know when this will be released. So we're that organized. No. But yeah, the awareness piece and the curiosity being, you know, and then again, I think, Juliet, to your point, being compassionate and realizing that this is actually a really great opportunity. I know it may not feel like that. And I think if someone told me that, I would have like given my middle finger, but given what we talked about, it being the best tool that you have right now. It doesn't mean that it's your tool forever, but you know, it's helped you cope, in a very traumatic world, but it can also be a very big doorway into restoring your power. So any closing thoughts?
No, I think you said it all. And this is just one of many, many podcasts that we will do on emotional eating and the different components. So, we would love to hear from you guys. So if you have questions around emotional eating, or if there's any particular topic in this space that you want us to address, we are all ears. So please email us with your questions.
And if you can also leave a review on iTunes, an honest review, that will really help us get into news and noteworthy. And then that helps us help you, because then we can get really cool guests that will then want to come on our podcast. So anyone you would like to be interviewed, let us know, leave a review. And remember that we will be doing food diary reviews up until March. Once a week, we'll pick a person and we will do a 30-minute food diary review for whoever has left a review. So we want to reciprocate the energy that you put into giving a review. So thank you so much. Hey, Insatiable listeners, Allie here with one last reminder about that Healthy Hunger webinar I'd love for you to attend so that you can really make sure that your hunger isn't consuming your life. You can register for that webinar at alishapiro.com/healthy hunger. And it's this Monday, February 22nd at 8 p.m. And if you're listening to this after that date, still check out the website because a recording of the webinar will be available. Let's clear this up so that you can feel back in the control seat of your hunger.
Thank you so much for listening to the Insatiable podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. You can connect with us on social media. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Juliet Unite and Allie at Allie M. Shapiro. M stands for Marie. Please feel free to also email us any questions. We would love to hear from all our listeners. You can reach us at alishapiro.com and Juliet at unitefitness.com. We'll see you next time.